seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
And welcome to the State of Purple podcast on KFAN and KFAN Radio, the home of the 0-1 Minnesota Vikings. I am Aj Mansour. He's Jack Day. Jack, how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing well. I had some much-needed time off last week and then got home late Sunday morning and had to watch that unfortunate game. I know you were watching, that most of Minnesota is watching, and it turned out in one of the most typical Minnesota fashion ways it possibly could have.
Well, it felt for a little bit like it was going to be the opposite. Like maybe we were getting some monkeys off our backs. We hit a 53-yard field goal. Special teams played great. You know, some of those situations, there was even a defensive penalty, I think, on the Cincinnati Bengals in crunch time that helped the Minnesota Vikings move the ball down the field. So it looked like this was going to be a situation where maybe we were going to rectify some things. It was an ugly game, no doubt about it. Like, even if we had won this game, I don't know how much better we'd feel about the prospects for the season. Now, that being said, a win is a win and a loss is a loss, and it sets you back. All sorts of statistics that you see coming out of the first week of the NFL season, how 80% of Super Bowl winners win their first game. Just these crazy things like that that don't really, really matter, especially in a new 18-game season or a 17-game but 18-week season. Everything's a little bit different, but I think, Jack, it's safe to say that when you looked at this schedule heading into the 2020 season, that this week one game, even though it was on the road against the Cincinnati Bengals team that is dangerous but not, I wouldn't say they're good, was one of those games that we chalked up as a W. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've had this conversation already where this was almost circled as a must-win game for the Vikings. I know it's early. I'm usually a more optimistic person when I'm watching the Vikings. It feels like that's been sucked out of my body already just 1 week into the season. And I wanted to reiterate something that you said, or you wrote an article on like before the season, but this is something that is going to be a reoccurring theme for the Vikings this season. And I think it's going to strengthen the concerns for the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings, because the Vikings are playing a handful. It's more than a handful. It's almost half of the schedule is all of these young mobile type quarterbacks that have a little bit of an edge to them. I know Joe Burrow isn't the most mobile. He has that mobility factor, but he was coming off of a knee injury last year, severe knee injury last year, and he played well. These younger guys that are coming into the league, they just seem to have a little bit different swagger to them that the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings just does not have.
Right, and we'll get to that. That does cause some issues for this team. But before we go too far, Jack, a quick reminder. If you're listening to this podcast, we love our podcast listeners. Thank you for going back and listening to this and being a part of the State of Purple family. We do record this live. This is a live interactive stream. So for those of you watching live now, please throw some comments in the comment section and we'll pull them on screen and include you in that conversation. Your feedback is oftentimes better than some of the stuff that we're saying. So throw it in there. We'll get you on there, give you some love, and hopefully help us transition to some of our topics. Now, Jack, you kind of mentioned it. The first topic I do want to hit on. Let me find my transition here. Boom. Let's hit this one. And we'll pop over here. Kirk Cousins. Has the outlook changed on Kirk Cousins? Now, it depends, I guess, depending on what your outlook has been on Kirk Cousins. There's been Kirk haters. There's been Kirk lovers. There's been the meh in between. Jack, has your outlook changed on Kirk Cousins over the last handful of years? He got the extension. His play on Sunday was good. The numbers, I have them right here. Numbers 36 for 49, 351 yards, 2 touchdowns, a 106.8 passer rating. That's not bad on paper. On paper, that's not bad. Now, what did you see on the football field? Did he play a good game? Could he have played better? Did he cost the Vikings the game? Was this Kirk's fault?
I don't think this game in particular is to blame for Kirk Cousins. Having said that, I was more frustrated watching this game, watching Kirk Cousins, than I feel like I have been in the past. I've been a huge Kirk Cousins advocate. I think I might have said that already. I've written articles looking at strictly the statistics. I wrote an article a few years back comparing him to what Aaron Rodgers did in the same season, and they were very, very similar. He's had really good stats. We're not here to question that. Kirk Cousins statistically would probably be a top 10 quarterback, but there's a lot more that goes into playing quarterback at the NFL level, and it all starts with leadership. And right now, watching that team and how they started in the first half of that game, they looked defeated. And they weren't even into a half of football in the regular season. And there wasn't leadership. There's a huge lack of discipline. And I think a lot of that starts with your quarterback. There's a lot more stuff that goes into playing that position than just putting up big stats. And like I said, the statistics are there. You can show me the stats until you're blue in the face, and I'll agree with you. He might be a top 10 quarterback just based off of statistics. But going back to what I said right before this segment, there's so many young quarterbacks coming into the league, and they have that leadership. They have that edge to them. It's a different feel. There's one play in particular where I think Adam Thielen got tackled, so Kirk Cousins got sacked, but the sack got negated. He gets pressure up the middle, and I think I was trying to count it in my head. I didn't have a stopwatch, but I was counting in my head, and it felt like it was in that 4-second range. So one, if you're getting 4 seconds in the pocket, you should know the ball should be out of your hands before that anyways. And there was the whole right side of the field was wide open. And when he realized that, it was too late. He had already tangled up his own feet and he tripped into his own sack essentially. And it's frustrating seeing this year over year after I've advocated for Kirk Cousins because, like I said, statistically, he's a great quarterback. But that edge, it's just not there. I talked about it a few weeks ago when we were out at training camp. It looked like he was fired up after making big plays. I just don't see that leadership and that edge that I want to see out of that quarterback position. And I hope that can change, but it hasn't changed over the first 3 years, and it certainly doesn't look like it's changed in the beginning of his fourth season with the Minnesota Vikings.
Right. We'll get this out of the way, too. I was a Kirk proponent. I used the past tense there. I don't know if you noticed that. But I have been a Kirk proponent all throughout. When they signed him, I thought that was the best option that they had. I was okay with spending the money. I was okay with the guarantee. I thought that he could bring something to this team and a talent level that they hadn't had. I wasn't sitting here saying save the money and stay with Case. That obviously hindsight was perfect there. It didn't work out for Case in this league. But at the same time, there does come a point where you have to kind of see what is and what isn't there. And you're right, with that leadership ability, that leadership, maybe effective leadership, let's call it that. I think Kirk is a leader of men. I think Kirk can lead people. He can be a good example. He can do all these things. I don't think he's a good leader on the football field. And that might be the difference with just a slight distinction there. I think that there is, even when you go back to his days in Washington and the whole "you like that" situation, you like to see that fire, but it almost seemed forced, right? From a guy who was uncomfortable being loud, uncomfortable being the focal point. It seemed like he forced that scenario. And I think that when we see him in those scenarios, getting excited at training camp, like you mentioned, getting excited in the preseason, I don't know how much you get excited for the preseason, but I feel like it's forced. And I don't think that you can fool adult NFL players. They're not the whole rah-rah college attitude that we see when college coaches come to the NFL. That doesn't work for NFL players. They're jaded. They're in it for the money. They're in it for the attention. They're in it for the competition of the game. They're not going to need to be riled up every time. And I don't think Kirk can do that anyways. But I think that there's a different style of leadership that Kirk brings to the table. And I don't know that it's the kind that you want as your quarterback for a football team. That's where it gives me the trouble here. Now, we can talk all day. There are so many statistics. Dustin Baker is a guy that you and I both know writes for Vikings territory, has pulled all these statistics out on Kirk Cousins, defending him and his stats and how it's not necessarily the garbage numbers that you think it is. We saw the stats last week about the only quarterbacks who have had 5 straight or 6 straight 26 touchdown seasons or something. And it's like Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and then Kirk Cousins is in that mix with Drew Brees and some other guys. He has the longest active streak, I think, of 26 touchdown seasons. That's over Aaron Rodgers. That's over these guys. The numbers are there, but for whatever reason, it doesn't compute to winning. And I think that there is enough flaws in his game. We'll talk about one of them here in a second, Jack, that negate some of those good things that he does. The consistency's not there, and there's enough flaws that kind of pull back the things that he can do good. He's not a terrible quarterback, but I don't think that he is a winning quarterback. And when you talk about, Jack, you mentioned the younger quarterbacks that come into this league that are mobile. We're going to see a lot of mobile quarterbacks on the schedule this year for the defense to have to worry about. But what that's going to do for Vikings fans as well is give them envy. Give them envy for potentially what Kellen Mond might or might not be. Envy for some of the quarterbacks that they passed on over the last couple of years, and envy maybe for what they might do in this upcoming draft already. Because I think it's going to be a rough sled to hoe here, and I think that we're going to have a problem at some point with people calling for Kirk to be benched or calling for Kirk to be put out to let Kellen come in and maybe have an opportunity. Now, Jack, the one thing I do want to talk to you about specifically for this week, and I think it's been a problem for Kirk throughout his career, but we did see it, very brightly this week. And I think the coach even called him out on it at the halftime on the television interview. Kirk Cousins holds on to the ball too long. End of story. Like that isn't a question, right? When you have an offensive line that isn't the greatest to begin with, some of it is patchwork right now because of some injuries. You got to be able to get rid of that football. Kirk Cousins holds on to the ball too long, right? There's no argument there.
Correct. And not only does he hold on to the ball too long, the pocket awareness, it's just not there. Like you look at a guy like Tom Brady, when people want to sit here and argue that pocket passers can still work in today's NFL. For one, I don't know personally how long that is going to last. I think if we look 5-10 years down the road, we're going to be seeing a lot more of the Kyler Murrays, the Justin Herberts, these young guys that have wheels, and they also have a rocket launcher for an arm. It's like that is the recipe for success, and that's the way the NFL is heading. And if you watch the true pocket passers, the Ben Roethlisbergers, the Tom Bradys, when the pocket starts to collapse, they find little gaps that they can squeeze into and still deliver a strike. Kirk Cousins doesn't do that. The moment he feels pressure, it seems like he's wanting to go down. He doesn't seem like he wants to step up or avoid that pressure. He trips on his own feet, or in this instance, maybe Garrett Bradbury gets pushed back into him and he falls over his own center. But it's just frustrating to watch. And you bring up a good point when Mike Zimmer is sitting here and he's making these remarks. And I'm not one that I don't really want to bring up this drama that happened, and it was a long time ago, and now both players are on the Vikings. But you almost have to look at what Everson Griffin said when he said that tweet out, like whenever that was back in January. I still think to this day, and this is just off of my heart and purely guessing this, I think Teddy Bridgewater all along has been Mike Zimmer's guy. That has been the quarterback where the Vikings fans thought they were so close, finally reaching that peak. And by the way, Teddy Bridgewater went out and won his first game starting for Denver, which I think makes this even harder for Vikings fans to see. I remember that preseason game, Teddy Bridgewater was delivering strikes. I think it was against the Chargers, I believe. It was literally a week before that devastating knee injury. But I just think that the NFL is going into such a different direction at quarterback. There still are the weird flaws, or not, I shouldn't say flaws, because Tom Brady is the GOAT, and I'm never going to argue that. But Tom Brady is pretty far and in between now. That's not what we're going to see moving forward. These guys would need to be mobile. And if you want to pay a quarterback that much money, you have to have the offensive line to protect him, especially if that's his style of play and playing in the pocket. And the Vikings don't have that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you saw the show script or were reading my mind ahead of this one, Jack. Let's bump up to that next topic right there because you kind of brought it up. As I scramble to get the date on my overlays updated, I don't know what I did there. It's not 8:25. It is 9:14. The Vikings offensive line had some issues. Lots of flags across the board for the Minnesota Vikings, but a lot of them on the offense. In total, 12 penalties for 116 yards. There were a handful of them, maybe 2 or 3 that were declined on top of that. The offensive line was a liability this week. We know that there's an injury to Christian Darrisaw. We're hoping for Wyatt Davis to get in the mix. I think that the concerns go deeper than that, though, Jack. What was your overall assessment of that offensive line last week?
It was ugly, and I think you and I had this conversation where it's like, hey, we're excited. We have Ali Udoh. There's new faces. The Vikings finally have this offensive line. It's homegrown talent, guys that they've drafted. I know Darrisaw wasn't out there, but if Darrisaw's out there, you have a first-round pick at left tackle, second-round pick at left guard, your center's a first-round pick, and your right tackle's a second-round pick. I don't think resources is the issue at this position. There's some sort of disconnect within that coaching staff where they're just not developing guys along this offensive line because they're given the talent. These guys are getting taken in the first and second rounds. It's not like people always say this, and I don't know why. They're like, Rick Spielman doesn't like to address the offensive line. That's not true. He has addressed the offensive line. These guys just have not panned out. Garrett Bradbury, I think Zimmer said something post-game, Garrett Bradbury got mauled back several times again. I know, and Zimmer mentioned they need to do a better job at getting him help because he is an undersized center. Why they drafted him was because of his athleticism. But if we're going to start seeing the Vikings have penalty after penalty and 1st and 15 and 2nd and 20 downs, you're going to have offensive linemen that are good in pass protection. You can't just have these athletes out there that are going to help you establish that outside zone scheme. We're not even going to be able to run the ball because I shouldn't say that because there were still some plays where it's 3rd and 20. It's like quick slant or they're going to hand it off. But it's just the recipe is not there for success with what they're trying to do. And it's frustrating to watch. The flags starting out the game, it was embarrassing, honestly, just watching that. It was like false start. And it's not even like penalties that it was like there were some bad holding plays as well along the offensive line. But false starts, it's all mental mistakes. It's stuff, and I know this is going to foreshadow again another topic that we have, but it's stuff that you learn in training camp and you learn in the preseason. This is stuff that from the coaching staff down, this stuff should have been figured out prior to the regular season kickoff for the Minnesota Vikings, and it wasn't. It was ugly. It was one of the most undisciplined games I've seen in the Mike Zimmer era, and that's something I don't know. There's a lot of people that question if Mike Zimmer has lost this team already, and I don't think I'm ready to go that far, but the amount of undisciplined and stupid mistakes this team made on top of not performing well. I have the PFF grades. 5 of the worst offensive graded players on the Minnesota Vikings, or 3 of them, 3 of the 5 were offensive linemen. Garrett Bradbury had a 37.4 grade, Rashad Hill 49.7, and Oli Udoh 57.9. Like I said, there's not a better way to explain it than embarrassing. And it seems as of now, this offensive line hasn't been fixed. And now they get to go against Chandler Jones, who just had 5 sacks in week 1.
Right. There are mistakes that you can make. And there's, again, a distinction between them. You hold because you're beat, right? I mean, you don't hold as a technique. You don't hold because you're lazy, but that means you're beat. And that means the guy's by you and you're trying a last-ditch effort to stop him without letting your quarterback or running back get creamed in the backfield. There are other ones that are mental mistakes. Those offsides, false starts that you're talking about. C.J. Ham, 2 false starts. I think he had 1 penalty his whole career prior to this week, and he comes out in 2 of the first 3 plays and has a false start. Weird. Is that a mental mistake? Probably. A miscommunication, lack of playing with noise or understanding. I mean, remember, last year they didn't play with any crowd noise. Well, I guess the artificial crowd noise, but that doesn't compare to even a 3/4 full Cincinnati stadium, Paul Brown Stadium. There are then the penalties or the situations that really get me concerned. You mentioned Garrett Bradbury. I don't know that he had a penalty throughout the game. Maybe if he did, it was 1, but he wasn't like one of the glaring situations when it comes to penalties. He was a glaring situation when it comes to poor play and getting bull rushed. I'm starting to think he might just be not strong enough to succeed in that position in this league. And you see the Minnesota Vikings put an attention on those beef eaters in the middle of their defensive line that can put pressure up the pocket. And I'm going to tie your two segments so far together with your Kirk Cousins criticism and your offensive line criticism. Tom Brady can step up in the pocket. Aaron Rodgers can move the pocket. He can escape the pocket. I think that there's issues with Kirk, but at the same time, the offensive line isn't doing him any favors because he's trapped. He is trapped on the sides because the guys are getting beat around the outside. He's trapped up the middle because Garrett Bradbury and the interior offensive lineman, Ezra Cleveland, played poorly. They're getting pushed back right into him, so he can't step up in a pocket. That one play you mentioned where he had an offensive line that kind of tripped him up was because the pocket was coming right into his face. So by the time he tried to escape after holding the ball too long, another story there, he trips on his own feet, gets run over by his offensive lineman, whatever it is, and it becomes a problem. So there's problems that are abounding across that offensive line. Some of them are mental mistakes that I think you can fix. Some of them are personnel, maybe when Darisaw and maybe Wyatt Davis get an opportunity to get in there. There's other ones that are just personnel. And Rick Spielman takes the chances with those offensive linemen, but maybe he just can't assess them. I mean, that might be what it is. We see offensive linemen come into this league all the time, whether they're first round, second round, third round, or beyond, that have success, and it just doesn't seem to happen with the Minnesota Vikings. So maybe that's the situation. Maybe it is just whatever they struggle, they continue to pick the wrong guys, and they're just not in there. Whether you look at Pat Elflein, Ezra Cleveland, Garrett Bradbury, maybe they're just picking the wrong people, and maybe we'll be proven wrong when Christian Darisaw goes in there and just mauls people. I'm hoping for that to be the case. Jack, let's pop off to the next segment here. Let's go over to the defense, the defensive side of the football. The defense last year struggled big time. Struggle bus, injuries. They get some bodies healthy. They get some new guys in. Michael Pierce comes into the picture. Have they improved at all? They lost to a team that they probably shouldn't have lost to and gave up a bunch of yards. Have they improved at all?
I think the conversation on paper, yes, they still have improved, but there were just little mental mistakes on that side of the ball as well that were extremely frustrating to see. Last year, when Aaron Rodgers came into US Bank Stadium week 1 and torched the secondary, that was expected because it was all these rookies that hadn't seen the NFL style of play yet. And on top of that, they were going up against a future Hall of Fame quarterback. They weren't doing that this week. They had a bunch of veterans on that side of the ball that are back. And I think Patrick Peterson played well. It didn't seem like he really got many targets from what I saw. But Bashaud Breeland, it's a conversation that I had when he was back with the Packers. I was talking to one of my friends who's a Packers fan. He's like, you're going to love him on some plays and you're going to hate him on some plays because he's going to get burnt. And he got burnt by Jamar Chase, and I think that left a sour taste in the mouth of many Vikings fans. Vikings fans haven't even got to witness Justin Jefferson hit the gritty in front of a sold-out US Bank Stadium, and instead they had to watch his 2 college teammates do it. I don't know if Joe Burrow got involved, but Jamar Chase was grittying after that play, and it was frustrating to see. Bashaud Breeland was graded. I think I don't have that number written down, but I'm pretty sure it was like a 26-something in terms of PFF. And that was ugly. I think Xavier Woods was one of the players that should have had that deep coverage in that last play of the game where, by the way, Joe Burrow went up and changed the play at the line of scrimmage. I don't know if Kirk Cousins is the type of player to say, hey, let's not run this ball anymore. Let's take a shot. And Joe Burrow, if you want to call it his second year, it is his second year officially, but he didn't play in that many football games last year before that knee injury. And he's already willing to kind of command that offense. And that's just the jealousy that Vikings fans are going to have to live with right now for the remainder of the season. And I'm hopeful and optimistic still about this unit. I think the defense will get it figured out. There's so much talent on that side of the ball. It was fun seeing Michael Pierce chase after the quarterback and get a couple sacks. It was kind of weird. I think Stephen Weatherly was the second highest graded player. DJ Wanham didn't have as good of a game. I don't know if that was some sort of mix up, if Weatherly should have actually been the starter there over DJ Wanham. You have to want to get Anthony Barr back out there because that's going to help a ton in the run game as well. But I was expecting, I know, like I said, Michael Pierce had those 2 sacks, but I was expecting to see Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson absolutely bully that offensive line. And I wanted to see Danielle Hunter bully that offensive line. That didn't happen. And instead, the player that the Vikings went up against, Joe Mixon, currently after week 1 leads the NFL in rushing yards with 127 yards and 1 touchdown. So it wasn't improved enough, clearly. And it only gets harder from here on out. You have Kyler Murray, who is one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch play. I think the Vikings defense is going to struggle. He's one of the best mobile quarterbacks in the league, in my opinion. He's so fun to watch. And their wide receiver core is no joke either. So their defense is going to have their hands full for that game. Then they come back home and they have Seattle and Cleveland. 2 very good offenses. It's going to suck again seeing Kevin Stefanski come in US Bank Stadium. And if Cleveland does end up winning that game, the road, I tweeted something out after the game. The road doesn't get any better for the Vikings from here on out. The next 3 games are brutal games. And if they want any chance at sniffing the playoffs, they're going to have to find a way to win at least 2 of the next 3 games.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll get to that in a little bit here, too. Before I go to the next topic, I do want to take a question from the chat. The G-Face, who is watching on Twitch right now, wants to know, Jack, are Zim and Slick Rick on the hot seat? And can you see them getting fired at some time this year?
It wouldn't surprise me. I know I hate to say that because I have been a Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman advocate. I don't know if it's necessarily I don't know if the 2 jobs, if one goes, I don't know if that necessarily means that the other goes. But Zimmer preseason was like top 5 ranked coaches of most likely to lose his job going into the season. And
those
after
odds, by the way, are updated. after week number 1. He is the second most likely, according to the Vegas odds, to lose. And I forget who was the first one. Oh, Matt Nagy with the Bears. So 2 interdivision coaches who are the top 2 as far as the odds go in Vegas for getting fired first.
Yeah, what a weekend for the entire NFC North it was. But yeah, I think I wouldn't be shocked, especially if this team starts 0-4. I don't think that's going to be good enough for the Wilfs. Normally, you see the Vikings after an off season. You've brought this up in the past. When it's an odd season, they tend to bounce back because the prior season was ugly. You can't even say ugly because the only way to explain how the Minnesota Vikings have been over the last 8 years is mediocre. I don't even want to say ugly. It's mediocre, and then they find a way to bounce back and get your hopes up, and then they crush your dreams in the playoffs somehow, some way. So I really wouldn't be surprised. I still think Mike Zimmer is a great defensive mind, but it's starting to seem more and more like opposing offensive minds, these younger offensive minds that are coming into the league. They're starting to figure out the old style of play that Mike Zimmer wants to run. And if this team starts 0-4 after this brutal stretch ahead, I would not be surprised to see if Mike Zimmer let go.
Well, we might be underestimating, too, the importance of Anthony Barr to a Mike Zimmer defense. Remember, he was one of, if not the first draft pick for Mike Zimmer when he came here and established his defense. And the big thing that he mentioned, I'll never forget it, he pulled all of us media guys into the old meeting room, the small meeting room at Winter Park for a pizza party, where we watched film with Coach Zimmer, and he kind of explained to us, this is what I do in Cincinnati, or did in Cincinnati. This is how I'm going to do it here in Minnesota, and this is what the players that we do or don't have on roster right now, we're going to have to fix that. Free agency draft, he spent a couple years doing that, brought in players that could fit that, Danielle Hunter being one of them. Anthony Barr, I think, might be one of those more important hybrid kind of players that is able to do that. So getting Anthony Barr back, I think, is more important than we know, but I still don't know that it is the end-all, be-all for the success of this defense. Now, Jack, I do want to break down a little closer, a little more in-depth, one facet of that defense, which you had discussed already, that defensive line. Revamped, healthy, Danielle Hunter back on there, Michael Pierce in the middle, Dalvin Tomlinson. I don't know if I heard Dalvin Tomlinson's name all day yesterday. Michael Pierce had the 2 sacks, but that defensive line, the middle of the defensive line specifically, was supposed to stop the run. And as you mentioned, Joe Mixon leads the NFL with 127 rushing yards right now. The Cincinnati Bengals are up there as well as far as tops in the league. So Danielle Hunter, Michael Pierce, Dalvin Tomlinson, and then you have Stephen Weatherly. Everson Griffin played actually a pretty decent game from what I understand. The coaches thought that they saw some old things from Everson that they used to see. To me, Jack, it feels like a paper tiger. It feels like it looks really tough, but it's not as strong as it may seem on paper. And it looked like that's what happened when we saw this game the other day against the Bengals. What are your thoughts on the defensive line specifically in their performance in week number 1?
Yeah, there was ups and downs, as there was with most phases of this football team on Sunday. But the one thing that I wanted to bring up when we talked about this is something that Ben Lieber actually brought up with the power trip. I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but he mentioned having Danielle Hunter in a 2-point stance instead of a 3-point stance. That's not something that Mike Zimmer and this Vikings, these defensive coaches, Andre Patterson, Mike Zimmer, they have not had him do that. I've been an advocate for potentially giving some 3-4 looks, but I don't think that meant putting Danielle Hunter in a different situation that he wasn't comfortable in. And I think that ties back to what you were just saying in the last segment. It comes down to Anthony Barr. I think that role fits so much better because Anthony Barr was a 3-4 style linebacker when he played at UCLA, and that's what he was going to be when he signed with the New York Jets a couple years back. He is good at getting pressure on the quarterback from a 2-point stance. Danielle Hunter, I think what Lieber said was he loses his leverage already. When he's in a 3-point stance, he can come up. He's a big dude, as most Vikings fans are already aware of. And when he gets that in that 3-point stance, he gets that leverage and he can really use his power and his strength to drive into the shoulder pads of that whatever tackle he's going up against. Whereas Anthony Barr is used to already coming from a 2-point stance. He's a linebacker. And I think that just hurts this defense so much, not having him, not only because he's a skilled football player, but he's a huge leader for this defense. He wears the green dot on his helmet. He is the play caller for this defense. And he knows Mike Zimmer and that defense better than anyone on the field at all times, I would have to imagine, because he's been doing it for so long. So I think not having Anthony Barr really hurt this team in Cincinnati, and I don't know how long this injury is going to linger for. It seems like it's a pretty reoccurring theme here in Minnesota that there's these weird lingering injuries year over year where we don't really know what's going on. I know Anthony Barr practiced limited last Wednesday or Thursday, and then he was done practicing for the week. It'll be interesting to see how the injury report comes out the rest of this week, if he's able to get out of practice, because I think that's a huge, huge loss, especially going up against such a mobile quarterback in Kyler Murray next week.
Here's exactly what Ben Lieber said. I happen to have it handy.
Role in the offense right now. Did it get better for you in the second? Because I know in the first half you felt maybe he was being asked to think too much and not play enough football. Did that change in the second half for you?
No, it really didn't. I mean, I think they got away a little bit from more the true stand-up 3-4 look. I just feel like I don't think that Danielle can't do it as far as a stand-up outside linebacker, but I just don't think it plays to his strengths. You know, out of a 2-point stance, he doesn't seem to have the same explosion. He doesn't seem to have the same reaction skills. He's a very tall guy. So to start in a 2-point stance and then take on a block, he's kind of already lost the leverage battle. And so I feel like for him, he's going to be much more comfortable just coming out of a 3-point stance, and that's how he ends up getting his sack in the second half. It wasn't out of a 2-point stance. So I think there's some tweaking with that look. I'm not saying that look is bad. I just think that for a guy like Danielle, I'd like to see him with his hand on the ground as much as possible and just reacting and not thinking so much about his responsibilities as a stand-up outside linebacker that may have perimeter control a little bit more than he did as just a hand on the ground defensive end.
So just like you said, Jack, the opportunity for Danielle, maybe he's thinking a little too much. Maybe he has too much difference on his plate. Missed the full of the season, so let's not forget that, right? Didn't play in the preseason. Well, that seems to be a trend, right? A common trend with the communication, the cohesion on offense and defense with those guys that didn't play in the preseason together, and they come out of the gates a little slow. One other quick question from the comment section, Jack. This one, I guess, is directed towards me, but I'm gonna throw it towards you. How comfortable are you with special teams? It seemed to be one of the shining lights this weekend, with Greg Joseph hitting a 53-yard field goal, Barry punting pretty well. I mean, he had that 63-yard punt that completely flipped the field and changed the game. Peterson 11 wants to know, how comfortable are you with special teams? It's not something we're usually comfortable with.
Yeah, I don't think, honestly, I'll ever be comfortable with Minnesota Vikings special teams. I think that's just ingrained in my memory. Like, I was at the Blair Walsh game when he missed that field goal. I've seen so many missed kicks, and then we have to go out, watch a great Monday Night Football game last night between Baltimore and Las Vegas, by the way. And you have to watch Anna Carlson make a clutch kick. It's right on cue for when Minnesotans are down, just kick them down even further, and they had to go out. Like I said, it was a great game, but it's so weird seeing other kickers leave Minnesota and then find success. I have optimism left. Like I said, I think that was the best unit on the football field for the Vikings on Sunday. The punting game looked much different than it did in the preseason. I know it's a new punter, obviously. Greg Joseph had a big kick moment. I don't remember. I know they called that timeout. I don't know if that first one went in. I couldn't really tell. But he buried that second one, and he kicked that, and he nailed it with authority. So right now, I'm feeling pretty good about the special teams unit. But I've learned in years past that can change rather quickly. So I'm not ready to say, hey, the Vikings have the best special teams unit out there. But it wasn't in any way a factor in why the Vikings lost that football game. Instead, it was what kept them in the football game. And the offense and defense were the two units that struggled more than the special teams, which is a rare occurrence in Minnesota.
Right. Sometimes that's all you can ask for with that special teams unit. Last question or last topic, Jack. We're going to switch over here. I know you've mentioned it. I wrote an article on KFAN.com about it already. Do we need to buckle up? I mean, is it possible that this season could only get worse from the way that it started? There were some concerns we had coming into this year. The offense not scoring a touchdown, the defense yielding yards left and right. Those things didn't get better in week number 1. You mentioned earlier, Jack, the schedule, it only gets more difficult, right? There's a very real possibility that this team could start 0-4 with Arizona, Cleveland, Arizona, Seattle, and then Cleveland on the schedule. And then you look at the teams that we circle like we should be have an opportunity to beat them, like the Bengals, like the Lions, who looked decent, or at least had some firepower and some fight down the line. The Panthers look better than we thought that they were going to be. The Bears might be a winnable one you can circle there. Maybe the Packers, who knows? But this schedule is not easy. We knew that coming into it. It might look like it's tougher. Is it just going to get uglier down the road for this team? And specifically, Jack, do you think they start 0-4?
If they lose in Arizona, I think they will start 0-4. I think that is still one of the more winnable games. I know this has been circulating on Twitter.
You think so?
I think so.
Arizona looked so good. It's a 4-point spread right now, which I think is super light. Like I'm not a gambling man, but if I was a gambling guy, I think I would take that opportunity and say Arizona's going to win by more than that, because Chandler Jones looks great. Kyler Murray looks awesome, and mobile quarterbacks give this team a fit.
Yeah, and it's more so going back, something that Patrick Peterson said. We're going to find out if this Vikings football team is a good football team, because good football teams don't lose 2 games in a row. He said that on his podcast at some point this week. We're going to figure out either the hard way. Sorry, that comment just threw me off a little bit. But I agree with you. I think the Cardinals are a very good football team. Like I said, Kyler Murray, I think he is one of those quarterbacks that kind of gets left off of like that top 5, top 6, top 7, which I have him in there. If I ranked my top 5, top 6 quarterbacks, I think Kyler Murray is right on that edge of being a top 5 quarterback. So more so what I was trying to say is, if they don't find a way to win in Arizona, it's going to get a lot uglier before it gets better. To answer this question, is it only going to get worse? I will say this, and I told you this before we got on the show. What I was doing prior to the show was actually watching 2022 the class of 2022 quarterback film, which is not a great sign. I shouldn't be doing that as a Vikings podcaster and writer 1 week into the season, but I was. And there's a couple names: Matt Corral, Ole Miss quarterback, and Desmond Ridder for Cincinnati. They have both looked fantastic. Granted, they haven't. I think Cincinnati had one tougher game, but they played well, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's not going to get any better. This schedule is brutal, and I hate making this comparison because I was bashing on them last year. But is it possible? This is a question for you, AJ. Is it possible that the NFC North could turn into what the NFC East was last year?
Oh man! So what? Washington ended up making the playoffs with a losing record last year, right? Is that? I mean, they beat up on each other a lot.
Yeah.
None of those teams were great. There was an injury. I think Taylor Heineke ended up playing that playoff game, but
he's back now. He's back. I think he's starting because Fitzpatrick got hurt. Another former Vikings player.
Yeah. So I don't think that this division is as bad. I mean, those teams were bad, right? I mean, you're talking about an Eagles team that had a young quarterback that couldn't figure anything out. Their offensive line was struggling. Their defense was terrible. The Giants were bad across the board. Saquon Barkley got hurt as well. Dallas without Dak. Dallas without Amari Cooper for part of the season. I mean, it was a situation where, a lot of those teams were just bad teams. I don't think that the Vikings are a bad team. I think that they have the pieces. I think that they are flawed very much, and they don't have the quarterback that they need to take them to the next level. Across the board, you're looking at Chicago might be down there. Detroit might be down there. Green Bay, I don't know what happened this last week. I really don't.
That was weird.
Could they have lost that game? Sure, but could they have been destroyed? I wouldn't have predicted that. I would think that Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to bounce back a little bit, but there was a lot more wrong in that game than just Aaron Rodgers that I don't know enough about. So I don't think that it's going to be the NFC East of last year, but I don't think that this is going to be a division maybe where a wild card team comes out of necessarily, or those situations. So I think there's a very good potential that it does get worse here, that they do get off. You're very optimistic about this Arizona game. I'm not. I don't feel good about it at all. I think that everything that Arizona does is what the Vikings struggle with, from the defense to the offense, and I think that's a bad combination. I think that Seattle is a similar situation. They're not quite as talented as Arizona, but I think same sort of fit. And then Cleveland is just this upstart fun team that everybody loves with a good defense and a pretty good offense. So I think that they do start 0-4, and I think that it goes into that Detroit game where everybody's down and saying this is a must-win game at home against Detroit in Week 5. And if it goes worse than that, who knows what's going to happen? Then we're talking about coaches losing their job, quarterbacks being replaced, all these situations where you begin to look at quarterbacks into the future like you're already doing. You have all those scenarios, but I think that it's going to get uglier before it gets better, and I don't love that prospect. So, man, this season, 1 weekend already took a big turn, right? It's not necessarily the end of everything, and we have no hope, but I think we had a little more optimism than we do going into the season than we do right now, and that's probably pretty safe to say. Hey, Jack, real quick. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I don't know if optimism would be the right word. I just feel like this is a must-win game already. It's so hard to say that because it's 2 weeks into the season. But if they don't find a way to kind of claw and scratch their way back in, I know all jokes aside, they're leading the NFC North right now because of the tiebreakers, which right. We don't need to get into that, but I wouldn't say optimistic. I don't have a good feeling that the Vikings are going to go in and win in Arizona, but they have to do that. If Mike Zimmer is going to have to coach his rear end off to do everything he possibly can to find a way to contain the star power that they have on that offense. Like I said, I love Kyler Murray. I think he's a baller. And then they have arguably one of the best wide receivers in the entire NFL in DeAndre Hopkins. They have AJ Green, who has been great in the past. Rondale Moore is a rookie that a lot of people have had eyes on. And then Christian Kirk is another speedster. They have weapons all over on the offensive side of the ball. They've gotten a lot better on defense clearly as well. So it's going to be a tough test for the Vikings next Sunday, but I don't feel super optimistic. I'm just trying to say that they have to win that game if they want to have a sense of direction in the future of this season. And oh, by the way, if they start 0-4, that means Kevin Stefanski comes back to Minnesota and shows his offense against a possible offense that is still struggling in week 4.
Right. And you have all those narratives of new school quarterback versus old school quarterback, new school coach versus old school coach, all the things that the fans are clamoring for to change here in Minnesota. Real quick before we go, Jack, we are making a little bit of a scheduling change with this podcast. We will now do 3 episodes a week, technically. A Tuesday episode recapping the week that just happened, a Thursday episode previewing and turning the page onto the week that is upcoming, and then a reaction podcast where right after the game we'll hop on for a quick short 10-minute podcast to get the initial reactions coming out of whatever happens. And we'll start that this week with that Arizona game. So you can catch that right after the game. Again, on all the social media channels, you can join that live stream for KFAN and participate in the chat and take part in the show, essentially. Or you can catch us on the podcast channel too, iHeartRadio, iTunes, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. But a little bit of a change now that we're in the regular season. We'll have some more content and more reactions coming everybody's way. So, Jack, thank you very much, my man. I'll let you get back to the A job and the actual responsibilities that I take you away from when we do this show. I appreciate you taking time out to share your opinions and share your thoughts and your knowledge with everybody on the State of Purple podcast. See you later, man.
Ten seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs.